The key question is, what were Bismarck's aims in 1862? Bismarck's father was a moderately wealthy Junker. The Junkers were the landowning nobility with their own rules of conduct based on an elaborate code of honor, devotion to the military life, and a strong sense of service to the Prussian state, and an even stronger sense of their own importance. Most were deeply conservative. Bismarck was proud of his Junker descent, and all his life liked to present himself as a Junker squire. However, he was too clever, too enterprising, and too nonconformist to be a typical Junker. Bismarck's mother came from a middle-class family of Hamburg merchants. Many of her relatives were civil servants, university professors, or lawyers. Most were politically liberal. Bismarck seems to have been ashamed of this side of his family, often speaking of them in disparaging ways. He did not get on well with his mother, but from her he inherited his intelligence and determination. At his mother's insistence, he was sent away to school in Berlin, where he proved a resistant to education, although he later became a good linguist, fluent in French, English, and Russian. He was an avid sportsman, a crack shot, and an expert fencer. He went on to university where he wasted a good deal of time and money, drank too much, and got into debt. Managing to pass his law examinations, he won entry to the Prussian civil service and spent 4 years as a less than committed civil servant. A year of military service followed, enjoyed neither by Bismarck nor by the army. On his mother's death in 1839, he retired to help run the family estates. Country life soon bored him, and he found entertainment chasing after peasant girls and playing wild practical jokes on his neighbors. By the time he was 30, Bismarck had achieved little. Then in 1847, two events occurred to change the direction of his life. First, he married, and secondly, he got involved in Prussian politics. His wife, Johanna, was deeply religious. "I like piety in women and have a horror of female cleverness," Bismarck wrote. Johanna satisfied both his requirements. Providing a stable background to his life, she brought up their numerous children and overlooked his constant infidelities. In 1847, Bismarck was elected to the Prussian United Diet. It marked his entry into public life. During the March days of the Berlin riots in 1848, he involved himself in counter-revolutionary plots. He was excessively anti-liberal. In December 1850, he spoke in the Erfurt Parliament in defense of Frederick Wilhelm's surrender to Austria at Olmütz. He argued that a state should fight only in its own interest, what he called state egotism, and war for Hesse-Kassel would have been foolish. "Gentlemen, show me an objective worth of war, and I will go along with you. Woe to any statesman who fails to find a cause of war which will stand up to scrutiny once the fighting is over." This speech led Bismarck becoming a Prussian envoy to the revived Diet of the Confederation at Frankfurt, where, apart from a short time in Vienna as the Prussian ambassador, he remained until 1859. During his years at Frankfurt, it became his overriding concern to oppose Austria. He therefore moved away from the views of his conservative Prussian associates, who had sponsored his appointment to Frankfurt. They thought the fight against the revolution was still the priority, and that it required solidarity of conservative powers, Russia, Austria, and Prussia. As he became increasingly anti-Austrian, he became convinced that war between Prussia and Austria was unavoidable. He believed that such a conflict would eventually lead to a divided Germany with a Protestant North and a Catholic South. By 1858, he was arguing that Prussia should seek support among German nationalists, and a year later that Austria should be driven out of the Confederation and that a little Germany established under Prussian control. By the early 1860s, he had a reputation as tough, ambitious, and ruthless politician. Although viewed mistakenly as a conservative reactionary and correctly as a loyal supporter of the monarchy, he was also seen with some justification as an unpredictable maverick. However, he was also a realist. Initially, Bismarck's aim was Prussian domination of North Germany rather than full national unity. He was essentially a Prussian patriot rather than a German nationalist. His loyalty was to the Prussian king, not to the German people. Liberal nationalists viewed him with disfavor in the early 1860s, seeing him not as a potential unifier, but as an anti-liberal reactionary. In the late 1840s and the early 1850s, Bismarck had shown little but contempt for nationalism. However, by the late 1850s, his views began to change. Aware of the popular appeal of German nationalism, he realized that the movement might be manipulated in the interest of enhancing Prussian power. Indeed, he intended to see Prussian and German interest as one and the same. He said in 1858 there was nothing more German than the development of Prussia's particular interests. Convinced the great issues are decided by might, not right, he was determined to make Prussia as mighty as possible. Prussian leadership in Germany would ensure Prussian might in the future. While he was determined to end Austrian power in the Confederation, he was not necessarily committed to war. A diplomatic solution, in his view, was a preferable option. Realpolitik characterized Bismarck's political career from the first to the last. This is a term used to describe the ruthless and cynical policies of politicians like Bismarck, whose main aim was to increase the power of the state. He had contempt for idealism and idealists. While he was a sincere Protestant, he was able to divorce personal from political morality. What was good for Prussia was good. In his view, the end justified the means. He recognized that a conservative regime could no longer operate under popular support, not least of the liberal bourgeoisie whose power was growing. He hoped to achieve conservative ends by means that were far from conservative. Otto von Bismarck's life can be kind of inspiring. I mean, here's his chart. His early life, he didn't do good as a student. He didn't like school. He spent a lot of time just chasing women and chasing alcohol. You know, he was of the younger class, so he had that egotism, but he was yet educated. As a result, his political career takes off after the revolutions. He's made a rep in the Diet, all leading to his appointment as prime minister. The question historians have is, was he a master planner or a great opportunist? And they still disagree on this. But what he did bring about was Prussian domination of northern Germany. He did this using realpolitik. He would manipulate German nationalism and had the Prussian might behind him to enforce it. Bismarck's unscrupulous methods occasionally brought him into conflict with Wilhelm I and the Prussian military and the political elites. But while many distrusted his tactics, most respected his judgment. Indispensable to the Prussian monarchy for nearly 30 years, he made the difficult unification process appear, with hindsight, easy.